The black bastion drifted through the silent void, a fortress whispered about in every corner of the galaxy. There were stories, always stories, about what happened inside its walls, tales of the universe's worst monsters locked away, left to rot, or to plot, or simply to be forgotten. Everyone knew, nothing escaped, and nothing survived unchanged. On the day the mistake was made, not a single soul suspected what was about to happen. It began in a chaos of reports after a distant skirmish, alien diplomats blaming a small group of planetary defenders for war crimes, evidence muddled in translation and urgency. Somewhere in a file room stacked with 1,000 blinking lights and robotic hands, a human name was stamped with a code meant for someone else. Riley, still shaken from an evacuation, found their hands cuffed, their questions ignored, their fates signed by the indifferent system. The shuttle journey was a blur. Aliens in armor, none willing to meet Riley's eyes, hauled them past sealed doors and scanning lights. One muttered a prayer. Another took a bet on how long the new inmate would last. Riley didn't understand the words, but the tone needed no translation. The Black Bastion's intake was clinical, almost bored. Scanners whined, machines prodded and sampled, guards watched as Riley tried to speak, until a metal collar snapped shut and silence became law. The lead officer, a scaly brute, scanned the file with a frown. "This is the human?" he asked. No answer. Riley was shuttled away, boots sliding across steel. The warden's AI logged. "Human inmate number 0001 processed. Threat level undetermined. Monitor closely." Through one thick window, Riley caught a glimpse of the others. They watched from shadowed cells, hulking forms, needle-fanged mouths, eyes that glowed or wept or blinked sideways. Some snarled at the new arrival. Some only laughed, a sound more chilling than rage. That first night, Riley lay on a hard cot, cold leaking through the thin jumpsuit, listening to sounds no human should hear. The building itself seemed to breathe, pulsing with the weight of centuries of fear and violence. Somewhere nearby, someone howled, the sound echoing until it felt like it might break the walls. Rumors rippled through the cell blocks. The humans, it was said, were supposed to be extinct, or impossible to capture, or worse, unknowable. Why would the council send one here? The inmates waited, some sharpening claws, others just watching, silent, curious, patient. The guards walked past more often than usual, glancing in then away. Riley hardly slept. When the lights flickered and alarms wailed, no one explained. The next morning, breakfast arrived through a slot, gray, tasteless, impossible to identify. Riley ate every bite. Inmates whispered. In the upper levels, two warlords argued whether the new arrival was bait or a test. Down in solitary, a telepath tried to pry into Riley's thoughts, only to recoil, confused by memories of open fields and childhood laughter. The Black Bastion held its breath, waiting to see what a human would do. The guards wasted no time showing their contempt. Orders barked, meals delayed, privileges denied. Riley was shoved into lineups, interrogated for hours, always with the expectation that something monstrous would emerge. The more they prodded, the more disappointed they became. Riley's answers stayed calm, even when threatened. There were no pleas, no displays of anger, only a quiet insistence that there'd been a mistake. This patience infuriated the warden, who watched every interaction from the tower, cataloging the lack of reaction. That first week, the inmates circled like predators. Some were drawn by curiosity, others by the promise of an easy mark. On the second night, a gang of 3 approached, looming and hissing threats. Riley tensed, but instead of backing away or striking out, simply looked them in the eye and offered to share what little food remained. The gang leader paused, uncertain. Nobody had ever responded like that. They took the food, left, and watched from a distance the rest of the night. Word spread quickly. A few of the more violent prisoners tried their luck, expecting either a desperate struggle or some hidden human strength. Each time, Riley did not meet violence with violence, nor did they cower. Instead, Riley listened, offered simple answers, even told a joke that made one of the brutes snort in surprise. Something about this new inmate unsettled them. There was no fear, only an odd blend of kindness and defiance. Within days, the tension in the cell block shifted. Fights broke out less often, and arguments now ended in muttered laughter rather than blood. Even the telepath, usually tormented by the minds around him, found Riley's thoughts oddly calming, a shelter from the chaos. Riley spoke to anyone who would listen, asking about home worlds, families, regrets. The guards noticed the difference. Reports showed violence was down 30%. The warden's AI flagged this anomaly, but every test to provoke Riley failed to produce the expected chaos. The guards tried new tactics: solitary confinement, deprivation, threats of punishment. Each time, Riley's spirit held. No matter what was taken, the human adapted. The other inmates watched this with growing respect, and some began to mimic the strange resilience they saw. For the first time in years, there was talk in the block about hope, about maybe surviving this place. At night, old enemies quietly shared scraps of food or whispered stories across the hall. Riley became a quiet center of gravity, pulling the prison's energy away from despair. The warden, frustrated, whispered to his AI, "Why isn't it breaking?" There was no answer. Change was subtle at first. Fewer threats, more hushed conversations. Prisoners who never spoke before now greeted each other, even if only with a nod. Riley's habit of listening instead of judging made others open up about things no one had ever asked: why they'd fought, what they'd lost, who they missed. One by one, stories traded hands, and grudges began to dissolve. Riley saw the shift and encouraged it, never with orders, only gentle questions and shared memories. Disputes that once ended in violence now ended with awkward apologies or quiet understandings. Those who led by fear began to lose their followers. Even the most brutal inmates, who'd once commanded with threats, found themselves ignored. Instead, prisoners gravitated toward Riley's cell, asking for advice or sometimes just to hear stories about Earth, about places where people forgave, where mistakes didn't have to define a life. In the silence after lights out, Riley spoke softly about hope, about how people could change even in the darkest places. The guards grew uneasy. Security logs showed new patterns: cross-species alliances forming, old rivalries fading. The warden ordered more surveillance, convinced the human was plotting something dangerous. But every review showed only small acts of kindness and resistance: notes passed, food shared, arguments settled with words instead of fists. The AI flagged these moments, unable to quantify the risk in simple terms. Something was spreading in the Black Bastion, and it wasn't chaos, it was unity. Not everyone embraced it. A few inmates tried to turn the tide, inciting fights or sowing distrust. But each time, their efforts fizzled. The unity Riley fostered was stronger than old loyalties or hate. When the warden brought Riley in for questioning, demanding an explanation for the sudden peace, Riley simply said, "People don't want to be monsters. They want to be seen." That answer rattled the warden more than any threat could. Whispers grew into confidence. Prisoners began making plans, not for escape, but for survival together. Riley's belief in second chances started to seem contagious. In a place built for cruelty, something unexpected took root. The Black Bastion felt different, almost alive with the possibility that even the worst could change. The guards watched, unsettled, as their power slipped away, and the old order crumbled without a single punch thrown. The tension finally snapped when the guards decided to make an example of Riley. A gathering was called, threats were shouted, punishments promised. Instead of fear, the prisoners stood together in silent defiance, refusing to be cowed or divided. The alliances forged in whispers now stood unbroken in plain view. Guards tried to force obedience, but every command was met with steady silence. The AI struggled to predict the next move, cycling through failed algorithms as order slipped from its grasp. The unity Riley inspired spread faster than the guards could respond. What started as a silent protest became a surge of willpower. Prisoners, once resigned to their fates, moved as one, blocking punishments, sheltering the weak, shielding each other from blows meant for Riley. The guards lost control of the block within minutes. Even the most feared inmates refused to turn on each other. The AI tried to lock doors, disable systems, flood the cells with gas, but the uprising pushed forward, coordinated not by force but by mutual trust and sacrifice. Riley never gave orders. Instead, each person acted on their own, knowing they'd be supported. The walls that had held centuries of hatred now echoed with determination. When the warden demanded surrender, the prisoners answered with a simple refusal. No more monsters! The AI faltered, unable to calculate a response to hope. Alarms blared, lights flickered, but the uprising did not break. When the doors finally opened, it was not with violence but with exhausted unity. The prisoners, battered but together, stepped into freedom not as enemies but as something entirely new. Riley remained at the center, not a leader, but the living proof that even the universe's worst could choose something better. Word spread beyond the Black Bastion. On distant worlds, stories began to circulate of the human who brought light to the darkest place. The legend grew, not because of strength or violence, but because one person had shown what was possible when fear was replaced by trust. In the aftermath, the galaxy was left with a single, unanswerable question: what else might humans change, given the chance?